Hello and welcome to the Recovery Matters podcast from CCAR, the podcast where putting recovery first is always the goal. Here we present interviews, discussions, stories, and speeches to cultivate the understanding and acceptance of the power, hope, and healing of recovery from alcohol and other addictions. Here are your hosts, Phil and Sandy Valentine.
Good morning, Sandy. How are you today?
I am most excellent because I am on vacation.
You're on vacation?
Mm-hmm.
I'll be on vacation.
You'll be
soon.
on vacation tonight.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. How have you been feeling lately?
Well, that's a deep question.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually been feeling pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I have been working my program recovery on some things that needed attention. And when you work it, it works.
Do you want to share what you've been working on?
No.
Okay.
No. I want to talk about our guest today.
No, but let's just kind of like
Okay.
surface area. Let's just go to the top of the pyramid, the iceberg, tip of the iceberg.
The tip of the iceberg?
About what you've been working on, the
All right.
issue.
So I have an addictive personality, which could be why I'm in recovery from the disease of alcoholism.
Could be.
And I've also identified in my life that I have a sugar addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And sugar comes in many forms.
Mm-hmm.
And a few months ago, 2 months ago, I gave up sugar, white flour, potatoes, rice, almost all fake sugars.
Mm-hmm.
And I am feeling lighter and better.
Mm-hmm.
Not more energetic yet, though.
Mm-hmm.
If I could have an afternoon siesta, I would be good to go for a longer day.
Well, that was a lot of the iceberg.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
You know what I appreciate is that you've been showing up at our story slams, the Pearls
Uh-huh.
story slams, people expressing addiction, recovery, life stories. And you know, we've had our guest has been, he was in the Grand Slam, wasn't he?
Yes. Well deserved.
Yes.
Made it into the Grand Slam.
Hi, Brian.
Hi, Phil. Hi, Sandy.
Hi.
Would you like to
Good
introduce
morning.
yourself? Who are you?
Who am I? That's a deep question.
Yeah, well, you can go as deep as you like.
I'm Brian McManus.
Mhm.
I am a person in long-term recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a formerly incarcerated person.
Mm-hmm.
And I am the recovery coach manager for the Department of Corrections program here with CCAR.
What did you think of the storytelling slams?
To be quite honest,
Mhm.
going into Megan Perry's first workshop,
Mm-hmm.
I was a little skeptical.
Me too.
I think that's maybe a little bit of my personality. But I bought in right away,
Yeah.
and I really enjoyed it. And, we've kind of created this little Pearls community
Mhm.
that, have, some great people, awesome storytellers,
Mm-hmm.
and some great recovery. So,
I really like the concept of pearls too, and we've had Megan on as a guest, but it's the idea of you just take a pearl off of your necklace and just describe that one pearl. You don't have to describe the whole necklace. And that resonated so much with me when Andrea Levitt was talking about that I thought that was a brand new way to tell stories that are media friendly and attention friendly. They're short, 3 to 5 minutes, but you can really convey a powerful message in that time.
I didn't realize how emotionally invested you can get in a story.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, after the Grand Slam, that next day, I felt it.
Mm-hmm.
There was that certain emotional tiredness.
Yeah. And when I tell stories, it's very healing for me to tap into those emotions and describe them, what that was like. And I'm a fan. Well, you know.
Yeah.
You know I am. I'm not going to let that go.
I felt the same way you did, Brian. Phil was really pushing me to go, and I don't know if you've ever seen this, but Phil occasionally has hissy fits
No.
when things.
Have you seen me have a hissy fit?
Not really.
Oh, yeah.
But you can imagine, right? You can just imagine. And so the first time he really wanted me to go, I had a work obligation, but he had kind of a hissy fit. So the second time I'm like, all right, I'll do it just to please my spouse. And then I found the whole process, it's a practice of recovery, just going through the process. And even if you don't ever tell your story anywhere else in public, I just felt there was a healing factor at work.
There definitely was. Just putting the story together, and the word that comes to mind is catharsis.
Mm-hmm.
It's just letting things out there in a different way.
I was always surprised at how stories shifted, because I've been telling my recovery story of how I found recovery a certain way for 30 years. And then because of the workshop, I realized that what I thought was the turnaround was really just leading up to the actual turnaround. And this process really forced me to dive into what really happened, what was really going on. And I just found that incredible. It's just, wow.
How did you choose your story?
When I was thinking about it, I was trying to come up with something that meant something to me.
Mm-hmm.
And also was something that I hadn't talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And for the last one, it was also something that was about not only my recovery,
Mm-hmm.
but my family's recovery.
Right.
We have something in common. We're the spouses of cancer survivors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that was, I think we explore the pain. The storytelling gives you permission to explore the pain and revisit it and rework it and rethink it and acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And it's also about vulnerability. And as we've come to believe, there's great power in vulnerability. That's one of the paradoxes of recovery, isn't it? So, you're neat. You could be like Clark Kent. You're almost like.
He does have that kind of
you
quality.
could be, is he Superman? Do you think really? But what was Clark Kent like growing up as a young man or a boy? What's your earliest memory and what was life like for you? So I guess when I say you look like Clark Kent, you're clean cut. He's
handsome. You can say that.
It's better if you say that
He's
than
handsome.
I say that. Very articulate. You can't possibly be in recovery. You weren't in jail. You're a white guy too. I don't know if anyone's ever told you that, but you are a white guy.
It was a shock when I found out.
Yeah. And so what was it like? And let's get to all that and see how we ended up in prison.
What he really wants to say is tell us about little Brian.
Yeah, exactly.
Clark Kent I've heard before, but I think the one that's more appropriate, Potsy from Happy Days.
Oh.
Dating myself.
I remember
I don't know
Patsy.
about that.
I don't think
I've
so
gotten
either.
that
Okay,
a few times as well.
Yep, okay.
Little Brian. I grew up in Hamden, Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up 2 blocks from our New Haven Center manager,
Rita.
Rita.
Yeah. Did you know each other?
She played softball with my middle sister. I'm the youngest of 4.
Mm-hmm.
I have 3 older sisters.
Mm-hmm.
So Rita and my sister Nancy played
So small
softball.
world.
So when I said to my sister, I was like, do you remember Rita? And she was like, her first words out of her mouth, great softball player.
Yeah.
So Rita's got that reputation.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, was the youngest of 4, so I was the only boy. So I was incredibly spoiled and tortured at the same time. I am I'm first generation. Both my parents are Irish immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a great childhood. Really loving family. I think just being part of an immigrant community, there's a big Irish community in the New Haven area. It was all about family and extended family.
What brought them to the U.S.?
Opportunity. My dad, they both came from small farming communities. My dad dropped out of school, or was told he was leaving school when he was 12, and he went to work on a pig farm about 50 miles away from where his family was. And as you can imagine, in the early 1940s in Ireland, 50 miles would have been like going to California for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you say 12?
12.
Wow.
And he was one of the most well-read people I have ever met in my life.
Wow.
Just an incredibly smart, kind man.
Mm-hmm.
My mom, her father passed away when she was 13. She was the second oldest of 6, so she and her older brother kind of took responsibility for the farm. And she had an aunt who had come to the United States. My aunt and her husband owned a bar in New Haven. And when my mom was 16, my aunt said, why don't you send her over? And so my mother at 16 went to live with an aunt that she had never met before.
Courageous.
Both of them, yeah, very courageous at young ages.
Yes, but it was just really part of the time. There weren't a lot of opportunities in Ireland. So my dad came to live with family in New York, lived in New York until he was drafted and went to Korea.
Mm-hmm.
He was a permanent resident, not a citizen yet, but
wow.
So and then after he got back from Korea, his sister had moved to New Haven, so he came to New Haven and they met in New Haven.
Wow. So when you think of Irish families, and you did mention about the bar, alcohol is usually involved. Is that true, or is that just a myth? Or
you know what? It's not a myth. There are people on both sides of the family who have struggled.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
You drink when you're happy. You drink to mourn. You drink to celebrate. It is part of the culture. I don't think it is as much of the culture as you see in kind of pop culture,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
it is very much.
Mm-hmm.
My mom, when I was growing up, didn't drink often.
Mm-hmm.
Having people over, and something I heard you said, she used to drink highballs.
Mm-hmm. My parents' drink of choice.
And my dad was kind of a shot in a beer type of guy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it was around, and my dad worked a lot. He worked 2 full-time jobs.
What did he do?
He was, in the mornings, he worked at the New Haven Colony Historical Society Museum in New Haven. He was a custodian maintenance guy there. And then he was a custodian for the New Haven school systems in the evening. And on weekends, he landscaped.
Wow.
Wow.
Education was really important to him. He sent, my parents sent my 3 sisters and I to Catholic schools from the time we started school through high school and education. I think probably because of his lack of formal education, they really stress the importance of education.
So you're a Catholic school guy.
I am.
And how do you talk about that?
I still consider myself a Catholic. I had a great experience. I think structure was a good thing for me. Especially, I was a very sensitive kid. So I think having kind of knowing where I was supposed to go, what I was supposed to do was a really kind of important part.
We have a child like that. We always joke he likes a well-run classroom from kindergarten on. If teacher couldn't provide that, that's the only time he wouldn't be doing well.
Yeah, and that was very much me. And
well, you said you were sensitive.
I was very sensitive.
Well, what does that mean?
If you looked at me when I was younger, I would cry.
Really?
Yeah.
And what do you think that was about?
I don't know.
Really?
Crying is my people, Phil. It's my people, right? I can tell already.
You're Swedish. He's Irish.
10 minutes into this.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I was...
If people looked at you wrong, you would cry. So
Yeah.
you were like, if you were in the mental health world and you touched upon it now with your roles, is that a diagnosis? I don't think being sensitive, it would be like, do you think you were anxious? Anxiety, maybe?
I've always struggled with a lot of anxiety.
Wow.
Yeah, my anxiety takes the form of tears.
Yeah.
You know, other people have it take different forms, but I cry.
When you're angry, you cry too.
Okay, I cry over everything.
It was just kind of who I was. And I was...
Aw. I want to give little Brian a hug.
Yeah. Well, and also little Brian was... little Brian shopped in the Husky department.
Oh.
You know, I was possibly the most unathletic kid you ever met in your life.
Really?
Doesn't this look more and more like me, just in male version?
I'm just along for the
ride.
Keep
going.
My Little League baseball career was 0 for 3 years.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So, but then I always loved the water. So my mother got me involved in swimming. And it was the best thing that kind of happened. I kind of started coming into my own a little bit around swimming.
Right.
What was the age differences between you and your siblings?
We are all almost exactly 3 years apart.
Oh, wow.
My oldest, I think the largest gap between any of us is like 2 years and 10 months. Or the smallest gap is 2 years and 10 months.
Yeah, wow.
Were you a good student?
I was, for the most part. I had trouble focusing. I was definitely a rule follower and got my homework in, and my mother would say that I probably could have done better in school, but I was.
You were probably bored with school. It was too easy, or was it?
Yeah, a very active mind.
Yeah, okay.
You know, thinking about it now. You know, I
think it's ADD, maybe?
A little ADD.
A little anxious?
A little anxious. Later in life, I was also diagnosed as being bipolar.
Really?
Yep. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on.
Were you bullied?
Not really. I always had a lot of friends.
Yeah.
I always was kind of the happy kid that, at least on the outside.
That people liked.
That people liked.
Kids liked. Yeah, got
Yep.
it. Yeah.
Awesome.
So sounds like some normal. I don't know what's normal anymore, but we've heard a lot of kind of adolescent stories of what it was like, and I've shared often about social anxiety, and only recently discovering in the last couple of years most likely have ADD myself and never knew it. And you said maybe an active mind, but that was me jumping around from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, just keep jumping. So what happened when did you start? I'm assuming, was drinking your first drug of choice? And
it was definitely
do you
drinking.
remember it?
I always remember like sipping on, my dad's beer.
Okay.
Or emptying the highball glass and taking a quick sip before anybody realized. And I liked it. There's a story that I just remembered.
Wow.
A few years ago, and it has become a kind of a part. When I tell my story, I always kind of include this. I went to Ireland with my parents. I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And it wasn't like we were going on a touristy vacation. It was purely, you went, visited family, and one house to the next. And there was one night my parents were going out, and it was probably a couple of days after we got there, and combination of the jet lag and just Ireland is not the warmest place in the world. It's always kind of cool and damp. I came down with a cold, and my grandmother said, why doesn't Brian just stay here with me tonight, and and you guys go out, and I'll stay back. So we did that, and my grandmother made me the Irish cure-all, a little hot toddy. Irish whiskey, a little honey, hot water, and it was one of the greatest things I ever remember.
It was a magical elixir.
The next night, and hindsight's 20/20. I remember lying to my parents that I wasn't feeling well.
No.
So you have another hot toddy
To
with
see
Grandma?
it, yep. To see if I could stay home and get another hot toddy.
Did it work?
No.
They knew that.
But, it was, the behaviors even then were starting to, it was that feeling. It just made me feel different.
So where did it take off for you?
High school.
Yeah.
It was one of those things. I was you hear it all the time. People are always saying they really didn't feel like they fit in. I did well in school, but I wasn't one. I was in, at that time, honors classes, the few AP classes that were, but I wasn't one of the really smart kids. I was a good student. I was a swimmer, so I wasn't really a jock. So it was like I kind of circled different groups, always in my own mind, not feeling like I fit into anyone, until beer was introduced. And from early on, I had a knack of drinking a lot, drinking fast, and for a bunch of 15, 16, 17-year-olds, that's a cool thing.
Yeah.
And just kind of took off from there.
Did you ever get caught?
Oh, I got caught a few times.
Yeah.
There was one night that I really overindulged. And I have two friends, and my mom still talks about them, because rather than just kind of ringing the doorbell and taking off, they stood with me to make sure that I got inside.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad opened the door. It was probably 12:30, 1 o'clock,
Mm-hmm.
and I literally fell
Mm-hmm.
in the door. And I mumbled something incoherently.
Mm-hmm.
And
Ugh.
yeah. And I was sick for about 3 days. I was grounded for a month.
Mm-hmm.
But, the first opportunity after, I went right back.
Understood. What happened after high school?
I did pretty well in high school. I got into a good college. I went to Providence College.
Woohoo!
Go Friars.
Mm-hmm.
Another Catholic school.
Yep.
And it was the perfect place for me.
Mm-hmm.
Providence is a beer school.
Who would know? I would have thought wine. But.
Yeah. Back in the mid 80s to late 80s, it was there wasn't a big drug culture, but it was a lot of beer.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to do well, kind of a reoccurring story in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to do well enough
Mm-hmm.
to keep people happy and off my back.
Mm-hmm.
But beer took a really big role. Drinking became a really big part. And once I had one or two, another recurring pattern was I didn't have an off switch.
Right.
What was your community at school? Because, I'm working on a campus now, and how did you find your connection group? Obviously, beer had something to do with it, but...
it just ended up kind of forming together. I lived with my freshman year roommate, one of them for 4 years, the other one for 3. I am still, 31 years later, we still have an active text thread of 13 guys.
Wow.
That we still, one has found the rooms with me.
Okay.
But it was just, we kind of all just kind of happened to fall together.
Yeah. So not a sport or fraternity or...
No fraternities
Yeah.
at Providence. And the one really good thing that came out of my 4 years happened my last week, my senior year. I was at a party. We had a formal the last week that we needed a date for. And one of my buddies wanted me to ask one of the girls who was kind of in our equal but opposite set of girls that we always hung around with.
Mm-hmm.
And, being the anxious, unsure, I was like, no, I really can't. And he said, we were at a party in his apartment, and he was like, I'm not giving you another beer until you ask Carrie to the...
Mm-hmm.
And she knows this story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went up. The master of timing that I am, she is consoling one of her friends who just asked someone and was turned down.
Oh.
And I asked, at the time, Carrie Ryan
Mm-hmm.
to go to the senior formal with me.
Mm-hmm.
31 years later, we're married for 25 with three daughters.
That's
Wow.
awesome.
Yeah.
I was afraid you were going to puke on your shoes because that's kind of part of Phil's story.
That was the first time I drank and went to a dance.
Yeah. No, I did that my share of times.
Oh, yeah.
So Carrie
pretty.
Ryan from a nice Irish family?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Her dad was a high school gym teacher, kind of the old school gym teacher and basketball coach, kind of the real old school gym teacher who people hated, but then came back years later and thanked him for, teaching them a lot of life lessons.
We had a CCAR board president and served as a personal mentor for me for many years, and a friend of Sandy and I, Bill Leary, who went to Providence and is a big benefactor for Providence, and I think
ice hockey.
Yeah, he built the girls' ice hockey locker room and things like that. So,
basketball, hockey school.
Yeah,
those are the and actually track. Are kind of the
their soccer team wasn't too bad either.
They made
right.
I think a Final Four run about 2-3 years ago.
Yeah. So you met Carrie, and you probably got a little more schooling knowing what you ended up doing.
Yeah, so after that, after graduating from Providence.
With what kind of degree?
I had a degree in history.
Okay.
So I used to joke I was going to open a history shop, because people would ask me, what are you going to do with a history degree? I went to law school, which was in my mind, it was what was expected of me. I think it was assumptions that I made and not really put on me by my family, but I thought it was being put on me by my family. Because it was always, I had a cousin who went to law school, and she was always kind of, that's what you do. And then I had a cousin who was, went black sheep of the family, Yale undergrad, Harvard MBA. And there was always kind of I remember my parents having a conversation, why isn't he going to law school? And, but he was getting his MBA from Harvard, so I was kind of like...
That works, too.
Yeah. I was like...
So where did you go for law school?
At the time, it was the University of Bridgeport.
Okay.
Right down the street, really, from the CCAR Bridgeport Community Center. But the law school at the time, the whole university was having some issues. And the law school actually seceded from the University of Bridgeport and became part of Quinnipiac.
Oh, okay.
So I
haven't heard of that happening before, but okay.
I think it's the only time in the history of, at least for law schools, and our second year of law school, it's a 3-year program. We weren't sure if we graduated, we would be able to take the bar because of accreditation issues with the transfer of the schools. But I graduated.
So are you drinking all through undergrad and grad school?
Yep.
Who paid for your schooling? Just curious.
I was very lucky in terms of undergrad. Providence was very generous to me. I was able to get scholarships and grants, and I got out of Providence, and my parents told me that law school would be on me. So they said, you can live at home, but in terms of tuition. So I worked in my last year of law school. I worked full-time at the world headquarters of Subway. Sub shops.
You did?
Yeah, in the legal department.
Okay, that makes sense.
Wow.
So
did you meet Don Furtman then?
I did, and then just because of circles, we ran into each other a few years ago again.
Wow.
And who is he, honey?
He is very outspoken person in recovery that ended his career as Chief Development Officer of Subway and had a long career there.
And now he's chairman of the board of the Phoenix.
Yeah, and he's also, I think, he was on Undercover Boss, where he talked about his own recovery and all that. So it was
where he kind of
cool.
came out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I worked there. And at this point, my drinking was really weekends, but usually to excess.
Yeah. Are you married yet?
No, we got married a couple of years after I graduated from law school. Graduated from law school in 1993.
Did you become employed as a lawyer, as an attorney?
I did.
Mm-hmm.
I was working in Stanford for a small law firm.
Doing what kind of law mostly?
General practice, a lot of real estate stuff,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of wills, trusts, small business, evictions, stuff like that, kind of mom and pop legal work.
Did you like it?
I hated every minute of it.
No, you didn't. Really?
I
What?
never really enjoyed practice. I definitely did not like law school,
Mm-hmm.
but I was kind of in the middle of it. I was...
How do I get out of this kind of thing?
Exactly. I was invested in it.
Yeah.
And, I grew up in a family. We were working class.
Mhm.
I never wanted for anything, but there was never a lot of spare money around.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense to me. I mean, the thing that you've been threaded through is you've always had a lot of friends, a lot of people, no matter what. I would think that the legal profession is not all that people-oriented. I mean, that you're serving people, but not in the same way.
And that's the one thing I liked. I liked interacting with people. I liked talking with people.
Mm-hmm.
But the day in, day out grind of practicing law was just not something. And there were a couple of times where I thought I could possibly get out, and I didn't. And then, Carrie and I got married. A couple of years later, we had our first of 3 daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of, what was I going to do at that point? I was making a pretty good living. I was able to support, at the time, help support our family. So where do I go? And then, for the first few years, again, my drinking was kind of contained to weekends and maybe a couple of evenings a week, but it was controlled, uncontrolled drinking, if that makes sense.
You scheduled it.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then when our oldest daughter, Kate, was about 9 months old, I decided I was going to open my own law practice.
Wow.
And, probably kind of a combination of my old law practice was getting a little sick of me, and I knew the writing was on the wall, and I thought I was probably worth more than they thought I was worth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The egomaniac with an inferiority complex.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, kind of in one of those I'll show them moments,
Yeah.
I decided I was going to go out on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first year or two, it worked out really well. Again, I fell back into that rule follower, kind of good boy, doing everything. And then I had some friends who were in the mortgage business who would invite me out to lunch. And lunch for them would start around noon and maybe end around 6, 7 o'clock. And I was like, I kind of like this.
Man, you ate a lot.
There was a lot of calories, but there wasn't a lot of food.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that would happen occasionally. but it ended up slowly progressing, to once every other week, to once a week, to a couple of times a week, to almost every day,
Mm-hmm.
and then earlier and earlier, and the choice of places where I was getting lunch started out as kind of nice, okay, to I was finding the earliest dive bar that opened up and
Mm-hmm.
may serve some form of food.
So what's your family life like when this is all going on?
There were a couple of times there where I was given, the ultimatum, you got to get your act together.
Mm-hmm.
And I would, for a couple of months.
Right.
I think my first story was kind of around that, where I had about 60 days and things were going good, and I was on the golf course and someone offered me a beer and
Mm-hmm.
I had it and I was off on another run.
Yeah.
But, I would bounce in and out of the rooms when things were kind of getting bad for a week or two after that, or a month, and, then just go back.
And I heard so how'd your practice do or fare?
That's a great question.
How did your practice fare as you were spending more and more time in these lovely establishments?
My practice really failed. I started making a lot of mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I started covering up my mistakes. And, hindsight is 20/20, and hindsight when you're in recovery, thinking back to the things, you're like, you are such an idiot.
I know. It's also so anxiety producing when you start to make mistakes and try to cover it up, and just, oh my gosh, I can relate to that.
And I was just digging myself deeper and deeper into
Yeah.
financial holes.
Yeah.
I still had a fairly good business going.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of money in and out of my client trust accounts because I was dealing with people's buying and selling homes and refinancing mortgages. So to cover up my mistakes, first time I borrowed some money,
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote borrowed.
Right.
The worst thing that happened to me was I paid it back.
Mm-hmm.
Because once I crossed that ethical line, it became easier and easier to cross.
Mm-hmm.
Next time I did it, I probably paid back about half the money, and I was just digging myself deeper and deeper into a hole. I wasn't working as much because of my drinking.
Did you have people in your firm, or was it just still you?
It was basically just me.
Yeah.
I had a paralegal. I had a couple of paralegals from time to time, but I was the only one who had access to the financial records and
Right.
stuff. So at this time we have three daughters, and kids are expensive.
Mm-hmm.
We were living in Fairfield County and, trying to keep up with just what we considered a normal lifestyle. It was never like we had flashy cars, but, we wanted the kids to look good, do dance, do this, do that. And I can't put lipstick on a pig. I kept stealing money, always thinking the next time, the next big deal, I'll be able to pay back.
Right.
But the more I did that, the more anxious I grew. The more anxious I grew, the more I drank. The more I drank, the more mistakes I made. the more mistakes I made, the more anxious I got, the more I drank.
The more you took to
and
cover
that. And I just kept spiraling. And then in November of 2010, November 18th, I had a particularly bad day in terms of drinking. I had a business dinner that night, so I knew Carrie wouldn't know. She would expect me to come home with some booze on my breath. So that gave me permission to start at like 10 o'clock in the morning. And I drank all day, drank all night, came home. Morning of the 19th, I got up. And it's one of those days, just that headache, nausea. For me, part of my hangovers, I describe it as mind-numbing depression. Just, the world's going to end. And I got a call from one of my clients. And he said, I think there may be a mistake. The bank is telling me that my old mortgage wasn't paid off. And someone's been making payments on it. And I was like, nah, that's got to be a mistake. Got him off the phone as quickly as I could. And everything he said was absolutely right. At that point, I decided, I had screwed up everything in my life. My wife and kids were better off without me. And over the previous couple of years, I had been collecting life insurance policies. And as an attorney, I had realized that the suicide clause on those policies had expired, and if I had killed myself, there'd be enough money to pay back the money I owed, and Carrie and the girls would be at least taken care of for a little bit until Carrie would be able to figure out something. So I made the decision I was going to kill myself. At this point, there was absolutely no hope. I was dark inside. I was devoid of any hope at all. So I went out. I had been driving around with a full propane tank in the back seat of my car for a couple of weeks. Combination of laziness and a combination of, if I got in an accident, the car would explode. So I found this kind of deserted road with a big group of really old, mature trees, and I was going to drive into that as fast as I could, and hopefully they would be able to find parts of me.
There's a lot of flaws in that plan.
Well,
But I get it. You weren't thinking too well.
I wasn't thinking too well. But so I found it. I was driving towards it, and a thought popped into my head. My daughters would never be able to ask me why.
Right. Wow.
So I had told Carrie that at this point I was going to kill myself. I had taken apart my cell phone, taken the battery out of it. I think I had watched enough spy thrillers in my life to know if I had done that, they wouldn't be able to track my phone.
All right.
I put my phone back together, and I told her I was going to head to Bridgeport Hospital because I was really scared that I was going to do something to hurt myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the first time I honestly asked for help. So I spent about 10 days there.
So you instead of going to the road with the trees, you had this thought, and then you told Carrie you were going to go to Bridgeport Hospital, which wasn't a ruse. You actually went to Bridgeport Hospital.
I was on the road with the trees,
Yeah.
and I was heading towards the trees when I had the thought about my daughter, so I stopped.
And you went back home?
I didn't go back home.
But
I
you
couldn't go back home
got
at
it.
that point.
But you went straight to Bridgeport
To
Hospital instead. Wow. Wow. How'd you know to go to Bridgeport Hospital?
It was the closest hospital.
Just a hospital. I need help.
I need help.
Wow.
I knew I wasn't in a place where...
And so you went in, and what did you say to them? Do you remember?
I remember walking in, and I just said, I'm scared I'm going to hurt myself. I need help.
And what was their response?
They put me in this locked room for the next, 24 hours.
Yeah, so kind and compassionate, right?
It's better than the waiting room.
Well, I guess, but we'll lock him in there so he can't hurt himself.
And I just remember being in that room asking God for help.
Yeah.
I had asked God for help previously. I had said, if you get me out of this situation, I'll do good things with the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I thought, getting me out of this situation was winning lotto and being able to pay back and keeping my family intact. And I prayed that night honestly, and, my prayers were answered.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the way that I wanted them to, or I thought I wanted them to be, but in the way that I needed them to be.
Right.
So I spent the next 10 days in Bridgeport Hospital. That's where I was diagnosed as being bipolar, and also that, there's a good chance you're an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm probably one of the few people who just latched onto that bipolar diagnosis and said, no, it's not the booze, it's
bipolar.
Did you go through DTs?
I did. I was, I went through the detox protocol while I was in there, and the decision, and at this point there still wasn't any police involvement, so the decision was made between Carrie and I and my family that I was going to, when I got out, I was going to get an attorney and I would turn myself in.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent Thanksgiving in Bridgeport Hospital and got out, I guess it was either late November, early December, and I got an attorney, and he said, well, we have two options. You can turn yourself into the state authorities and go to state prison, or you can turn yourself into the federal authorities because it was banking issues and go to federal prison. And he said, a person like you would probably be better in federal prison.
Wow.
So we had a meeting with the U.S. Attorney and a gentleman from the FBI, and I told them everything.
Mm-hmm.
And over the next 7 or 8 months, I cooperated with them. I showed them everything. And the day after my girls got out of school, we had made the arrangements because we didn't want the headlines to come out while they were in school, and the U.S. Attorney's Office was willing to wait. I pled guilty to 1 count of bank fraud.
Mm-hmm.
And then October of that year, I was sentenced to 21 months in federal prison. And then I was given a couple of months to self-report, and in early January of 2012, trying to do all the math in my head, my 12-step sponsor drove me to federal prison in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania.
Right.
I just want to go back.
One of your stories.
Yeah. I would just want to go back. That 12-month period from when I left the hospital, or 13 months until I reported, I became fully immersed in 12 steps. I went to multiple meetings a day, and I had a ton of support. You know, and 12-step meeting is one of the few places where you can go and say, I stole a lot of money, I'm going to prison, and someone will raise their hand and say, don't worry, been there, done that.
You mentioned that you discussed it with your family and Carrie.
Yeah.
So is that your parents and siblings?
Yeah, my parents and siblings, and Carrie's parents.
And how did all that, like, what was that experience like?
It was painful. The pain I caused Carrie, my mom and dad, and her parents. It was something that just, if I could take back those minutes. I often say when I am telling my story that I don't regret my journey. I regret the hurt that I caused. Carrie and my family, I'm one of the a unique person where my relationship with my mother-in-law, she was one of my biggest supporters.
Yeah.
Carrie often jokes that her mom got me much better than she ever did.
Well, I think what you shared really touches me deeply, because it's rare to hear a story. I mean, we hear the story of the active use and the criminal behavior or making bad decisions, and just when the addiction has a hold. But you came clean so quickly and so honestly, with incredible courage. I mean, to go to the hospital and to say, I think I'm going to hurt myself, and then to say, I've been messing up all this time, I want to make it right, I'm going to turn myself in? Wow. Wow.
I won't give myself that much credit, because the noose was definitely tightening.
Well, you could have resisted, and you could have gone a different way.
You could have run.
Yeah.
And I don't know that your family probably they might have been hurt, but I don't know how surprised they were. I mean, I don't know how good a job you did of hiding all that from everybody.
The financial stuff was a surprise. The drinking was definitely not a surprise.
Right. So you hid that part pretty well.
I had been able to hide it from a lot of people.
So you went to prison. Did you go for 21 months?
I spent 15 months at the federal prison camp in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania.
And what was that like for you?
Carrie and I had decided going in that she and the girls were only going to visit twice in those, because we didn't want the girls spending their weekends in a prison visiting room. We wanted them to do soccer and ballet,
be kids.
And be kids.
Yeah.
So the separation from Carrie and the girls was really hard.
Oh, yeah.
but it also gave me some time to think and contemplate and try to figure out, what I was going to do.
Right.
And I met a guy in prison who was a real estate investor from Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
who had previously had many, many years of sobriety, of recovery.
Yeah.
And he relapsed and made a lot of bad decisions himself,
Mm-hmm.
and he ended up in prison, Ira Pressman. But he had that foundation in the 12 steps, and we went through the steps together.
Mm.
It was a time where I was able to kind of focus on my recovery, and try to help become the father and husband that I wanted to be. Got out. I spent 3 months in a halfway house here in Hartford.
That must have been fun.
I would have stayed in Pennsylvania for the 3 months if I had known.
The full house was better than the halfway house.
It absolutely was.
Wow.
One of my friends from high school helped get me a job with a power washing company.
Woo! I like that.
It was... I fell off a roof at one point.
Well, you said you're not too athletic.
Exactly. You put me in the water, I'm great, but you put me near water and on a steep roof.
What a
That's so
metaphor,
good.
though. You're cleaning up.
Yeah, I joke it was a good, clean job. Well, I remember, and you'll appreciate BJ's in Manchester.
Oh, yeah.
I was just there.
It was in August. I was cleaning out the produce dumpster
No, sir.
outside.
With a power washer?
That was probably the low point.
Well, we've all been there.
Yeah.
Well.
But some people in the neighborhood started seeing that I was trying to do the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
and they put me in touch with a guy who kind of had a little bit of a similar story, who was running a private investigation agency.
Mm.
And he ended up giving me a job doing legal research they did background checks on reality TV show contestants.
Wow.
A job I couldn't make up if I... So I did that. I still wasn't making
Mm-hmm.
a lot of money, and I was looking for a part-time job. And you hear the stories about people with criminal records having a tough time
Mm-hmm.
getting jobs, and it's absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get a job in a convenience store. I couldn't get a job with a cleaning company. I was being turned down for all sorts of jobs.
Especially when they're probably more tolerant of other charges than when they see bank fraud,
Yeah.
right?
Now, did your family have to relocate because of the loss of income?
Carrie went back to work. She had been home with the kids.
Okay.
She was able to get a job. She worked. She works in children's publishing.
Mm-hmm.
We had a woman in our neighborhood who was I forget her title now, but she had a very good job with Highlights magazine.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We had a subscription.
Yeah, we still do.
Yeah.
And they needed help in their publishing, with their publishing arm.
Nice.
In the marketing department. It was a job which allowed Carrie to work from home, except 2 days a month. At that time, she would have to go out to Pennsylvania, where they're located. So she went back to work, and we also got a lot of help from Carrie's parents.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they wanted, the house we were living in was the only house that our girls really knew, and it was important for all of us that they have that kind of sense of
Continuity and stability, yeah.
So you couldn't find a job, and you're getting turned down. Something must have happened.
I ended up reading on Craigslist that there was a job. Knowledge of the 12 steps, driving men to AA meetings for a facility in New Haven. I was like, great. So I sent in my resume, called me back. I went in for an interview. It was aftercare program in New Haven, which has kind of blown up since then. I met with the Phase 1 director, and he's looking at my resume, and he goes, there's a lapse here, and you were an attorney. He looked at me, disbarred. I was like, yes. He was like, prison? Yes. He was like, most places that would eliminate you from consideration. Here we consider it a badge of courage or a badge of honor.
Right.
So I got a job working at Turnbridge in New Haven part-time. So I would work the private investigation thing during the day. I'd work.
Who interviewed you? Was it John?
John Stewart, yep.
Yeah, that's good.
So I worked there a couple of nights. I would work there on Saturdays and Sundays. And that was my first job in kind of the recovery field.
Right.
So I kind of kept doing that type of work and working the day job. The girls were doing well. In September of 2015, Carrie was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer.
Wow.
So she had a tough, she's an amazing person. She has had a tough decade. So she had surgery, went through chemo and radiation. Thank God she is doing great today. But kind of rocked our world and rocked my sense of, things had been going well. Things, were going back. And again, I fell back on the friends in recovery who really gave me the strength to get through. We got through that. So Carrie finished surgery, was diagnosed in September. Getting diagnosed at the end of September is one of the worst things that can happen to a woman, because in October it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and everywhere you look is a reminder.
Yeah.
At least for Carrie it was.
That's an interesting point.
So she made it through. 2 months after she finished treatment, her mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and passed away 10 months later.
Wow.
And her mom was such a huge part.
Your biggest supporter. Your fan.
Yeah. And I mean, she just was a huge part of our lives, our girls' lives. So it was, that was, just one blow after another. That October, the state of Connecticut told me that I would never get a license as a private investigator. So on my birthday, my boss at the time said, "Happy birthday, can I talk to you in my office?"
Oh boy.
And the conversation went, you have a job here for as long as you want one.
Mm-hmm.
But he was like, you're really kind of boxed in. You're kind of at the point where unless you had your license, there's not a lot of room for growth.
Right.
And at the time, ego and everything, I was, pissed off and annoyed with him, but it was the best thing he could ever do for me. And then over the next kind of typical, knowing I had to do something but trying to figure it out, it was December 29th. I was looking through, not want ads anymore, but online want ads. And I saw a job. And it was for an emergency department recovery coach.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I did not know really anything about recovery coaching.
Mm-hmm.
But I looked at the job description and I said, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I showed it to Carrie, and Carrie was like, this is what you've wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
She was like, go for it.
Right.
And I sent it in, and I just talked to a bunch of people that I knew in the recovery field, just from having worked in the treatment side. And they're like, yeah, it's a great organization. And I think the job posting expired on the 31st. I put my resume in on the 30th. And a few weeks later, I got a call, did a phone interview, and by some stroke of luck, a little help from God, I was offered a job in the emergency department.
We look at your history too and say that's your prison term. That's part of your resume.
Yeah.
Not a badge of honor. It's your resume. Yeah, everything you said lines up with exactly what you're telling us. So yeah, why not?
And then I started, I think, on March 11th.
Yeah.
My father-in-law, while my mother-in-law was sick, we found out that he had a serious lung condition. That was terminal. And a week later, after I started, he passed away.
Oh my gosh.
So
he's been through a lot.
I haven't. Carrie's been through.
You're part of all that too.
She
family's been through.
The family has been through a lot. Our girls. Yeah.
A lot of loss.
A lot of loss.
And you were an emergency department recovery coach for a period of time.
Yes, I was. I did it I was a coach for a year. I absolutely loved it.
Very good at it too. You saw a lot of people in the emergency departments.
I did. And the nice thing is, I have a couple who still reach out to me.
Yeah, right.
A few years later, I will get. There's a gentleman who will reach out to me on Facebook, and I have a woman who will call me every few months just to check in.
And I know the schedule was pretty demanding. It is for emergency department recovery coaches, no doubt. And you made a decision for your family to go to a different setting where you'd have more of a set schedule.
Yeah. We were working combinations of nights and days and weekends, and I had spent so much time away from my family.
Yeah.
And missed so many things. Someone presented me with an opportunity for a job that was 9 to 5, Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
Coaching.
Yeah.
And I think I was a little bit naive
Mm-hmm.
because I thought, everybody in recovery and coaching, we were doing it for the same reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to work for a private treatment center.
Who shall remain nameless.
And I really found out pretty quickly that my philosophical ideals
Mm-hmm.
didn't exactly match up with theirs.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty diplomatic.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And
Well, it became apparent the way you described it to me is that it was more about the billing hours and whether you were actually trying to get people well, which is the way of the treatment industry in a lot of places, unfortunately.
our success was determined by how long we could keep someone in the program.
Mm-hmm.
Not, and my philosophy was somebody may want or need a coach for a month.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're at a good place and they feel good, that's your choice.
Release them.
Yeah, let them fly.
Yeah, let them go.
But they had set time limits and expectations, and when words like metrics come into recovery coaching,
Mm-hmm.
It didn't align with my beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
which were really a lot more aligned with the CCAR beliefs.
Right.
So if you ask Jennifer Chudukowicz and Rebecca Allen,
Mhm.
I think I spent the next year trying to come back.
Yeah, I know.
I think I may be the most interviewed person in CCAR history.
You're up there, but we've had other people we've interviewed quite a few times too.
And
then we had a fit that for you and for CCAR, where we brought you in to manage our Department of Corrections Recovery Coach program. What's that been like for you?
It has been an absolutely incredible experience.
Mm-hmm.
I came in with, at the time, there were 3 coaches who were absolutely amazing people and amazing coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly after I started, 2 other coaches had been hired
Mm-hmm.
and joined the team. And we just recently hired a 6th coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, honestly, a team that makes my job seem like I'm not really working.
Mm-hmm.
I try to do my best not to get in their way.
Right.
Because they are really good and really talented coaches, and they're just as talented as they are coaches. They're just even better people.
Mm-hmm.
Which corrections facilities?
Right now we are in York. We're still doing everything virtually.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully come September, we're starting to see some movement and some things that we will need to do, some trainings between now and then. But we're in York, which is the women's prison.
Mm-hmm.
We are in Robinson, Osborne, Willard Cybulski, Corrigan, Hartford Correctional Center,
Wow.
New Haven Correctional Center, and Bridgeport Correctional Center. And we're in the parole offices in Hartford, New Haven, Waterbury, Bridgeport, and Norwich.
It's so powerful to think about what's happening in the world today with decriminalizing and addressing social injustice issues and all of that. And while all the legislators figure all that out and the police departments, CCAR's in there already supporting recovery.
Yeah, and it's something that I'm passionate about recovery, but during my time, you pointed out something. I'm a white guy.
Yeah. I'm glad I could point that out for you.
You know, and coming out, I had friends, I had people who were still willing to help and support me. I had an education. A lot of people really coming out of the prison system who didn't have the things that I had, who were incredibly smart, talented individuals, who just really every door was slammed in their face. So why wouldn't you go back to using or going back to their previous lifestyle?
You've had those advantages, and you faced an incredibly difficult road, and people that didn't have your advantages, it's impossible.
It really is. And the amazing thing that the coaches are able to do, we're lucky to live in the state of Connecticut, because there are a lot of resources for things like recovery, reentry, but it can be very challenging to find them. You know, we live in an alphabet soup of agencies, and you know, it's very easy to get frustrated. You know, you're newly out, you're back in the community, and someone tells you to go to ABCD to get whatever you need, and you go to ABCE, and they tell you, no, you're in the wrong place. So what the coaches are able to do is help people navigate. We all know recovery's difficult. Reentry's difficult. You put the two things together, and it just makes for a volatile combination. But what the coaches are able to do is able to just let people know that you know, you have someone here, someone who's willing to help you get what you need. And they've done an incredible job with that. If I can't, there's a great story that Dominic tells. He was working with a guy for a few months while before he was released. He had been in prison for a number of years. I want to say 20 plus. And Dominic met him the day after he got out at his halfway house. And guy said, give me a hug. And our coach Dominic is a big hugger, so he hugged the guy, and the guy stepped back and said, you know, this is the first time in 20 plus years I've been hugged by someone who cares about me. So Dominic calls me. He was like, I struggled to keep it together. I could hear the emotion in his voice. And that really just sums up what we're trying to do. And that guy is doing great now.
Care about one another. It's not rocket science.
No.
Don't let the policy or the bureaucracy get in the way of what we need to do.
You know, I think since taking this role, I've sat on a lot of reentry meetings, and I hear a lot of people talking about, well, a coach in a reentry type position needs to have lived experience and been in prison. And my thought is, after seeing our coaches, no, they don't. They just have to care. And, you know, I go back to something I learned in the Recovery Coach Academy. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's really the philosophy that I try to keep our program based on. If we care about people and they know it.
So all through COVID, we've had we haven't had the ability to go into the prisons. That's what we're really looking forward to. But how many people have we seen since the program started, roughly?
As of yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
it was 204.
Which is still, wow.
Since January, I have to do a little math.
And this is July.
this is July.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I believe it's close to 160.
Right. And so we're just really starting to build momentum and think about 160 individuals that would have returned without any support, any help. Oh, I wonder what you think the result would be. It's probably not going to be as good as it has been, right?
The numbers are that someone coming out of prison is 200 times more likely to overdose.
Mm-hmm. 200.
200.
Right.
To the best of my knowledge, I don't think we've had anyone who has engaged with the coaches. Some people have gotten out and have not engaged.
Mm-hmm.
But of the people that we have actively worked with, we've had no one overdose in that time.
What a tremendous opportunity, too, for people who have had the time in prison and don't want to return, but don't really know how to live a life of recovery, and just to be available to coach recovery.
Yeah.
And say, this is what you need to do, and this is what to expect, and you can get through this. It's just such a phenomenal program, and so needed, not just in Connecticut, but everywhere. Why wouldn't it be?
And Brian, you think about, I'm really good at seeing God's handiwork in the rearview mirror, but your entire story does craft you to be absolutely perfect for this role, with everything you've gone through, even reunification with family, all the pieces. And I'm so glad that you came today to share all that with us.
Thank you.
I think that's part of being sensitive. Your sensitivity is working for you now.
Yeah.
And the other part, just to tie it up for me before we wrap up, is you say you were diagnosed with bipolar. Is that still true? Do you see yourself that way, or do you hold on to that, or?
It's something I struggle with.
Right.
I definitely think my drinking had a definite effect on my
mood swings.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
There are still times, not nearly as pronounced, where I will go into kind of a funk.
Yeah.
And I will
Mm-hmm.
feel, that sense of dread, that sense of the world's going to end.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm taking care of myself, if I'm doing the right things in terms of my own self-care, they're farther and farther apart, and I recognize them. Carrie will recognize if I'm feeling a little off,
Mm-hmm.
and I can do things. I'm no longer on medication for it.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times where Carrie will say, "You're getting a little manic."
Really? Wow.
But it is not what it was.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really, I'm in a good place right now.
Yeah.
Especially since I got back to CCAR.
Yeah.
I will say the other place that I was at, I wasn't taking care of myself, and I wasn't my moral compass wasn't aligned with
Mm-hmm.
their business practices.
Got it.
So I would have a lot of periods where I just felt that sense of dread, but I'm happy to put my head on my pillow at the end of the day now.
Yeah, I'm very glad you're back Thanks for making that decision.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think that's it.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.